My name's Matt Harriman, and this is the Achieve and Enjoy podcast, where we explore the relationship between work and happiness, achievement and joy, success and contentment. We do that by sharing our own stories and interviewing some really interesting people that you've probably never heard of, but that have something to teach us about how to achieve our definition of success and enjoy the path that we take to get there. And today, Jide Ayangade is my guest. He's about as bad a golfer as I am, but he's a really interesting person that I think has some great mindset and perspective on life that I'm excited to draw out of you.
Thank you, Matt. And on the golf perspective, I think you got it twisted because right now I'm looking up to you in terms of my golf game.
Yeah, we're both
Uh,
getting our money's worth out there, that's for sure. So I'd like to start with your career. So this is kind of centered around work, but we'll talk about how that plays with happiness and highs and lows and all of that stuff. But when I looked at your work kind of history, you started with massive, I would say more traditional companies, Baker Hughes, Conoco, and then now you're in possibly at the leading edge of innovation with augmented reality and virtual reality and trying to apply that to, that same traditional industry of oil and gas. I'd like to hear just the story of your career. It doesn't need to be your resume, but
yeah.
where did you come from? How'd you get here? Let's talk about it.
It's always very interesting because I know you mentioned Baker Hughes, but I guess there's a lot before that
Mm,
period, right? I grew
okay.
up in Nigeria and moved to the States in 2006, but I got a background in engineering, chemical engineering, and to some extent, maybe a lot of people might not even know this. When sometimes in my family, there was chemical engineer was an act of rebellion. I still had to be an engineer because there's a lot of engineers in the family. My dad wanted me to be a mechanical engineer, so an act of rebellion was, okay, well, I'll still do engineering, but maybe chemical on my own terms. And that's what I did. But for some weird reason, I wanted to be in the oil and gas
Mm,
business. And it was something very, very simple, right? It wasn't because I guess oil and gas was also shoved in your face in Nigeria. It was everywhere you look. But my mom had a mentor, a much older mentor who had two kids. One was a lawyer and the other was a chemical engineer. And they both working in the oil and gas industry. And I got talking to them, and one thing that just really piqued my interest was how much they traveled. And they
mm.
were always traveling internationally. And that was very appealing to me at the time. It must have been maybe 19 or 20. So regardless of whether I knew I was going to end up where I am today, I just went, okay, I'm going into the oil and gas industry because I want to travel. I see videos of people shuttling between rigs in different locations, going to all these places. I think I have a little adventurous spirit, right? But anyway, that's kind of like the backstory before I went to New Mexico Tech for my graduate studies in petroleum.
So I want to hear more about this mechanical engineer versus chemical engineer rivalry and like why that was an act of rebellion from your father.
Maybe rebellion was more of maybe it's a stronger word, right? It's just something that is expected of you. And I was like, well, I
Yeah.
don't want to do that, like you have to go do advanced math. I'm not really as good as you. I mean, he was really brilliant. He's pastor now, but he's really brilliant. His undergrad was in mechanical, and then he went to Purdue for his aeronautical and astronautical engineering.
Okay.
Just saying that, just like, okay, you're showing yourself, right?
Yeah.
In a way, I was just like, okay, well, I don't want to do the same thing you did, even though I wasn't completely sure I knew what I wanted to do. You probably often heard about a lot of, I don't want to generalize, but I would say it's pretty prevalent in Nigeria that there's a joke that you're either a doctor or engineer. And I guess there's a reason to that because it was a way that you could maybe get a nice, reasonable way of life through those professions beyond opportunities available at the time in the country. It's a different story now. The economy is so much diverse,
Mhm.
If I had lived there, I probably would have gone a different track than just engineering.
It sounds like you kind of wanted to carve your own path a little bit and didn't just want to follow exactly what your dad did.
Exactly. And then after my undergrad, I applied to grad schools. I would have actually ended up in the UK, but my dad fell sick and afterwards he passed away after about 8 months. But it
Mm.
was very interesting because had that not happened, I'd have been in the UK, but then it just kind of deferred my plans and applied to schools in the US and I got admitted. And after he passed away, I picked New Mexico Tech. And a lot of people don't know New Mexico Tech because it's in a very small town in New Mexico, Socorro, which is about 75 miles south of Albuquerque. When school is in session, it's 7,500 people. When school is out of session, it's 2,500 people in the town, right? So it's really, really small. It's a really college town, engineering tech town. And I deliberately picked that because it was completely different from where I grew up. Lagos had 20 million people. It was overcrowded. And I think it was also a way to get some solace, right? Solace after he passed away, and it's just a quiet place.
Yeah.
And no regrets since then. From New Mexico, I got my graduate degree in petroleum engineering. While I was in school, I actually started with a startup, a Dutch startup.
Okay.
And that Dutch startup was the company that got acquired by Baker Hughes. That was kind of like the Baker Hughes story. And it's kind of a long-winded way of telling you about how I got to Baker Hughes. And even that startup was on the, I guess, on the edge of technology, advancements at the time.
Is that where you met Jim Tom?
Yes. Jim,
Yeah, because I
Jim
remembered there was
actually,
somebody
yeah,
else that I knew that's talked about a Dutch tech startup or something, so
yeah, yeah. Jim actually hired me out of, because I was working in the Albuquerque office for the company. And Jim hired me to come help him start the Houston office and the go-to market strategy for the company. Company at the time was developing software similar to Petrel, right? It's
Mhm.
called Joule Suite, right? Reservoir characterization and simulation workflows. I guess I was thrust into the intersection between geosciences and engineering and all the head button that goes in between.
So then you went to Baker because Baker bought that
Yeah,
company.
yeah. And then Baker got bought that company. I enjoyed it. The whole period, it was about 7, 8 years. Phenomenal people. I got to travel quite a bit, which
Mhm.
I didn't think I would, but essentially got my dream of being able to travel around the world. And with Baker, even turbocharged that traveling into a lot of exotic international places that I wouldn't have dreamt of traveling to as a 19 or 20-year-old.
Yeah.
And afterwards, I had this craving, right, to get the experience from an EMP standpoint. Obviously, the money was also a lot better, but I felt or I thought at the time that I needed to get that experience as part of my career or part of my exposure to this oil and gas industry, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and so I got an opportunity to work for ConocoPhillips, and it was short-lived because I got laid off there in 2014, I think, due
Mhm.
to the downturn and also, I guess, primarily because the asset I worked was being divested, right?
Yeah.
So we're essentially just hired to put the bow on top of it, right? And sell it off. But it's always very interesting. Like you go from place to place, the cultures might be very different, but you still meet a lot of phenomenal people there, right? And that's one thing I keep running into. Like, okay, well, they're really a lot of smart people. There are a lot of good people. There are a lot of interesting people too. And then after Conoco, I also had the opportunity to work for Blackstone Minerals, which was think also one of the most rewarding aspects of my career because I would like to think I'm one of the few oil and gas professionals who's touched every single basin in
Mm.
the lower 48
Okay.
because Blackstone Minerals is, I think, one of the biggest holders in the US in, I think, every basin. So I got to touch every aspect of that in some form or fashion. Obviously, there's some basins that were more active than others. It was also very, very rich exposure, and it was a small team. In a way, I missed that small team from my startup days. I don't know if it's because of how I was raised. I was the firstborn, so you had a lot of responsibilities. You did a lot of things, and I just kind of wore that on like a sleeve. It was nothing to me. I enjoy doing lots of different things and being responsible for lots of different things, not just one task, right? And I got that exposure again. It was a fun rewarding experience too. Also, amazing people. Probably know Jessica Bird from Blackstone, yeah,
Yeah.
as well. So,
Totally agree. I've found the same thing. No matter where I'm at or what company it is, there are really, really good people. And, on the consulting side, like I've worked with companies that are, just fundamentally broken and dysfunctional kind of across the board. But, there's They're just really good people, even within those companies that are fighting the good fight, trying to make good things happen, treating
Yeah.
other people well, like all of that
Yeah.
stuff. Even
Yeah.
inside, really rough cultures, there's really good people. You use the word rewarding a few times when you were talking through all that. What are the types of things that would make a role or a time at a company rewarding for you?
Just like you, I think I'm a people person. I like interacting. I like understanding. Okay, what exactly do you do? Not so much what value do you bring. It's just like what makes you tick, and rewarding beyond just the economic benefit of being able to work for this company is being able to have those conversations with people, understand how they work, and be exposed to what they do, and get a little bit of that experience in what they do and how it fits into what you're doing. I think we should always ask, hey, I don't like the notion of just being a number or gear in a box, right, on an engine. I like to know, okay, even if I am, what's the overall objective that we're all working towards, right?
Yeah.
We're cranking, and being able to interact with all the other components of that gearbox and understand, okay, what exactly they do. I
Mhm.
think for me, it's also kind of rewarding. It makes me feel like there's some kind of grand purpose to what I'm doing.
Yeah, the connections that you build in smaller companies, I feel like are tighter, and it sounds like a little bit of it for you is about learning too. So you mentioned being
Yeah.
able to touch every basin in L48, and I think there's a personal growth aspect to it all that is it's hard to replace, right? And if you're in a place where you can get it, it's man, it's really, really rewarding, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it makes sense that you would tend toward kinda smaller companies and smaller teams and things like that. So that was Blackstone, and then you were at Enverus,
And
and now yeah,
well,
go
so
ahead.
the Envernus deal, also that was a contract gig because I was laid up for Blackstone as well during the 2020 COVID oil and gas downturn, and there was a pivot at Blackstone. It was no longer acquisition focused, right? It was just okay, try to lower working interest and increase the revenue from our royalty properties, right? And there were some very concentrated areas where that was shift in direction, and that affected me. And so I started a consulting company that was used. That's how I got into Embarrass with actually knew uh, James Ruiz when he
Yeah,
started Q and the time when they got acquired by Embarrass and were trying to integrate their solutions into the bigger platform. So I was contracted to help with the QA QC process for that. And that was also a very short stint. And subsequently, I got to have the opportunity to invest and also help grow go to market for this new tech venture that I'm involved with, which coincidentally or not coincidentally is also Dutch
yeah.
startup. It's almost like I've gone full circle, right?
Yeah, you can't get away from the Dutch, can
I
you?
can't get away from it.
I do wanna talk about what you're doing now a little bit, but before
Yeah.
we do that, looking back over your career and, the journey from Nigeria to the States to the wondrous exotic lands of Albuquerque. And that whole journey, what were some of the highs? What were some of the lows? What was hard about it?
I think the lowest for me, maybe at the time of the whole journey in the States was maybe losing my dad at the time, right? It wasn't so much the academic or the work process. And yeah, I think that was just really the low moment of it. But
Did the solace of the smaller town, did that help you process things and grieve and cope?
I think so. More so because I think the landscape was also very foreign to me, right? Just there for the adventure, like there's this image or this picture that I still have in my head because where I stayed on campus was at the foothills of this huge mountain, right? And right
Mm,
across from the place was the golf course. And I always remember I was on the hole 13 and I'd call my buddies who ran the golf shop and after classes, I would start from hole 13, walk my way up, talk shop when we get there, buy drinks, and then continue all the way back. But doing that, sometimes just being out there it was a very slow paced environment, and I think that was also a healing in a way. Even up to now, I still miss it. I still pan for that kind of experience, that feeling that I
yeah.
had in Socorro. A lot of people didn't really like it, but for me, no regrets. I loved every single moment.
how do you feel like that impacted your kinda outlook on life, outlook on work and everything with your dad passing away and as you worked through that and everything?
One day at a time. That's yeah, I think it's a mantra that just stuck with me. And in a way, I mean, I'm Christian, so there's also this Bible reference that says, "Hey, give us our daily bread," right? It doesn't say monthly, it doesn't say yearly, it says daily, right? So I just like, okay, well, one day at a time. Even if you're going through highs and lows, it all always passes if you live it one day at a time. And I think we talked about this, trying to connect it to what you mentioned when we're playing golf, where you said you have this huge task, right? And you have to look for ways to chop it up and take it one muscle at a time, right? There's some element of that in living. I try to live my life one day at a time. With kids,
Yeah.
it's almost like 1 minute at a time. So,
Yeah, yeah, because 1 minute is very different from the next.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm fascinated by the impact of death
yeah,
on us because in our family, we've had near misses, a bunch. My daughter has a medical condition. We've had more scares than I'd like to think about and all that kind of stuff. But I walk away from those with a better, I think, perspective on everything. And I think it pulls me back to living in the present moment. I know the Buddhists, they meditate on death a lot
yeah,
and they think about it a lot to remind them that, this moment is all we've got. And no matter what happens in the future, the best thing you can do is to be fully present.
yeah. Maximize this time you've got because yesterday's past, you can't go back.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is not a given, right? And just maximize what you got today. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't plan, right?
Yeah.
But in the interim, today has its troubles, and you have to deal with it. And even like living according to that also helps to deal with the mortality or immortality question, right? It's just besides my dad, my mother-in-law also passed away 2020, and
Mm.
that was even more profound because we had to move it from Santa Fe down to Houston, and then just seeing the whole, I guess, dying process also like crystallizes this whole notion that hey, just take it one day at a time. Enjoy every single moment you got because tomorrow is not a given.
Was her death COVID related or no?
No, it wasn't COVID related.
Okay.
It was cancer. But she knew and we'd kind of been preparing for it, but no one still prepares you enough when you actually see the degradation that cancer takes on the my dad died of cancer too, so it's like you could
Mm.
just see the withering away of this person that you never knew to be sick, was always very active, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden, yeah. It's painful, but I try to learn from those
Mm.
experiences. Like, hey, tell the people you love, hey, I love you every single day. Live your life day at a time. And tomorrow has its problems. Today has its problems. Deal with today's problems as they come. Yeah.
I'm sorry for your losses, but I can tell that you've processed them and you've thought about and tried to like grow and learn from it. Because I mean, what else can you do?
Yeah, still processing them, they were
Yeah.
they were tough losses, but they still I tell my wife, like, hey, I'm not guaranteed. I couldn't like poof right there and then. So
I think that that's something that, from the pandemic in 2020, I think it kind of forced everybody on earth to realize a little bit is
yeah.
that just death became a little bit more prevalent in people's awareness. And
Yeah.
I think that's what's caused a lot of people to quit their jobs and, focus on figuring out what'll actually make them happier. And I think one that I think about a lot is the idea that a lot of people are deferring their happiness. So in a startup, I'm gonna kill myself. I'm gonna work 100 hours a week until we exit, and then I'll retire and be happy. And I know a lot of people that went through that,
Yeah.
and they're not actually happy on the back end. But what scares me about that approach is you may not make it to year 5.
I like that you brought that up because I want to kind of tie it to I mean the title of the podcast is Achieve and Enjoy, right? And I enjoy it depends on the kind of job it is, right? The
Mhm,
startup is a lot of work. You walk
mhm,
you walk a lot, especially if you're invested in it. You walk a lot, make quite a bit of sacrifices that might make you cry every now and then too. One of my favorite quotes, I might just paraphrase it here, was from Elon Musk, where he says like, "It's like eating glass. and you still have to smile about it, right? But if you enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
If you enjoy what it is you're doing, then it changes your lenses through which you perceive either success or whatever it is, right? I thought it was important to try and link that back to the idea of this achieve and enjoy
Yeah.
podcast. Is
And I think it depends so much on the individual too, because and the time that they're at in their life.
yeah,
There are times where, you're really passionate and you want to put your whole, being into one thing. And
yeah,
there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. With this kind of stuff, I think about regret
yeah,
and living in a way that you won't have regrets and
yeah,
being intentional about the sacrifices that you're making. Because some of the people that I know that they built a company, exited, made millions of dollars, but they have regrets about how they were as a father or how they
yeah,
were as a
yeah,
husband or things
yeah,
like that. And like that's
yeah.
really, really tough to stomach. And in talking to them, I can see the pain of
The
that
pain.
regret. Yeah. And I'm still trying to figure all that out, obviously. I don't think anybody has it all figured out. There's something there about the sacrifice being, worth it or being intentional or something there.
Yeah, the journey is gonna be different for everybody. I hate giving advices or saying anything about it's gonna be very different for everybody. Yeah, regret is one of those things. I think regardless, regret is always gonna be there, but I don't like the term regret, right?
Hmm.
Because we make choices, right? And when you do a look back and you say, "Oh, coulda, woulda, shoulda done that," you still don't know what the outcome of that choice would have been, whether you'd have regretted not taking this path that you did
Mhm.
choose. And how do you quantify before you make that decision what's going to be successful or not, or what's going to make you content? On I don't know. We're all on this journey, and you take whatever. If you make mistakes, you learn from it. I don't want to say it's a regret because regret is such a strong word. But when you make mistakes and you're able to course correct going forward, then yeah, you've learned from it.
I think I find the feeling of regret whenever I realize that I made a decision that at the time I kind of knew wasn't right, but I kind of suppressed it or I had a bad feeling or things like that where
I do too.
yeah.
I do too. The way I process it is, hey, I still had this experience I would never had if I didn't
Yeah.
do this.
Eh,
Yeah.
for sure. We should probably let some people more qualified in psychology talk about that kind of stuff, hey? I like thinking about those things because, I mean, this is the stuff that, we all actually think about in our day to day and are considering, are we making the right decisions for our families, for ourselves, all of that stuff. And I really believe that doing what's right is totally subjective to the individual and you have to figure it out for yourself.
You have to figure it. Yeah, you have to.
Let's talk about what you're doing now.
I love what I'm doing now.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's still a startup, so it's got challenges of its own, but we've tried to brand on the name of whatever we sell. It's called Baselines, right? But the name of the company is called Creative Technologies. And the backstory, the founder of the company, I worked with him in the previous Dutch startup, and he's always had this aspiration to be able to solve this communication divide between disciplines, specifically was geoscientists and engineers. And when augmented reality, AR technologies and VR technologies came, it was like, this could be a great way to help solve that divide. And
Mhm.
I truly, truly believe in it because at the end of the day, division is because of maybe lack or inadequate storytelling. And so Baselines was developed to help storytelling on the same baseline. Now, what we do is very, very specific to subsurface, right? So VR, AR technology or immersive technologies, whatever you choose to call it, has been used in other industries, right?
Mhm.
Now, how people perceive them or use them varies. Technology is always going to be like that. When the typewriters came and electric ones came, there'll be people who are like, the noise is too much or this is too quiet. There's always going to be whatever. But at the end of the day, the value that those technologies bring can be overlooked. The application of this technology to what we're doing is one of those instances. So in a way, what I like to think about baseline is what we're doing is there's a lot of risk in the subsurface. One of my professors used to say we know a lot about the surface of the moon than the subsurface because all we do is we stick things in the ground, acquire a lot of data, and then we make interpretations. Still, a lot of it is subject to interpretations. Now, imagine trying to communicate your interpretations on a piece of paper. something so complex, and things will always get lost in translation. And this immersive technology is one of the critical ways of lowering that risk in how things get lost in translation. And it's very, very complex, right? We're talking geology, we're talking drilling. I always think about this whole business as the three questions. It's like, how big is it? How quickly can you take it out or put it in? And what's the economic benefit of it?
We're still talking about
And
oil and gas now, right?
well, it doesn't matter if it's
No,
oil
I'm
and
joking.
gas. It don't, I kind of kept it to the subsurface, but I
Yeah.
guess you could use that out for anything else.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
We are all storytellers, whatever we decide to tell, and how best do we tell the stories for whatever intended use is what we try to do. We try to empower geologists, engineers, executives with the storytelling of the subsurface using this immersive technology.
Mm.
And we know it's already driving the kind of performance for drilling operations and driving the kind of performance we want people to already start having conversations around.
Okay.
And there's a reason why a lot of big tech companies invest in a lot in these kind of technologies because there's value to be had. I mean, think about healthcare. People would do 3D imaging of the brain for cancer, right? And
Mhm.
this is a 3D problem, and you're trying to explain or resolve it in 2D. Things would get lost in translation. But with technologies like this, they're better able to diagnose or plan operations with this. And even if it lowers the risks of the surgery outcome by 1%, 2%, I think that's huge already. It's that progressive productivity over time that starts to make it more compelling.
Using the immersive technology that drives people's understanding of the reservoir or whatever the part of the subsurface that they're looking at, right? Is
Yeah.
that the core idea that
So
you generate a
that
3D model based on the data and then you can
yeah, that is.
see it. Yeah.
So what immersive technology or well, what 2D screen technology did to paper technology is what immersive technology is doing to 2D screen technology. We always see things in 3D, and we're just getting to the stage of innovation where we're able to not just capture it in 3D, but also be able to communicate that in 3D. A lot of the times you have geologists who can see things in 3D, they can visualize things in 3D in their heads, or they have really specialized applications and workstations that allow them to do this. But at the end of the day, it's not a closed loop. You still have to be able to show that to someone who's gonna stick a pipe down and do something with it.
Yeah.
Now, how you communicate that is very, very vital. And I think this technology is able to do that and also help people understand the concept of scale of what we're dealing with. With old school papers as big as a whole table, and then we distill that into a 2D screen that is maybe how many inches wide, and it still doesn't capture the true essence of scale of what we're dealing with. There's a very lovely commentary from one executive who, for the very first time, put on a headset and saw the seismic data with the wells, and was like, "Oh wow, I feel so small to the seismic." It's like, yeah, that's that's how it's supposed to be because, we scrunch things up into a 2D screen that we really don't really understand the scale of what we're dealing with or appreciate, what we're dealing with. This technology gets me really excited, as you can tell. I'm very animated about how you'll be able to tell subsurface stories with this immersive technology.
It reminds me of, when I started at Chesapeake, I knew nothing about oil and gas. We weren't an oil and
Yeah.
gas family at all. I started there and, I think 6 months after I started, we started using Intersight for field development planning.
Yeah.
And so in Intersight, you're dragging facilities around, you're dragging takeaway points. You have
Yeah.
the wells are such a small like factor that you like consolidate them so you don't even see them and all of this stuff. So it's like a video game, like you're playing with it on a screen.
Yeah.
I think in my second year there, we went out and did a field trip to go
Yeah.
see facilities and wells and drilling operations, completions crews, like actually go see all this stuff. And
Yeah.
I remember it just blew my mind.
Yeah.
And it was like the complexity, the immenseness of these operations. It just cemented in my head like, holy shit. When I'm dragging that little thing 40
This is
pixels across, I'm actually moving an entire factory, from one place to another with hundreds of people attached to it.
Exactly.
That's really cool. How do you value that perspective?
What do you mean by that?
I'll tie it into another question. So, like, oil and gas is very splintered when it comes to
Yeah,
technology, forwardness. We're doing unbelievably complex things underground, but we're still
yeah.
approving $2 billion capital programs on paper. And some companies have their frac schedule in Microsoft Outlook and shit like that.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you get in a fairly traditional industry, how do you get people's minds wrapped around it's one thing to say, "Oh, wow, that technology is really cool," and it's another one to say, "Okay, here's X thousands of dollars for it, and here's how it impacts my business and stuff."
Yeah. In terms of how far the innovation has gone today, I think the technology is so accessible, for lack of a better term, it's so cheap. What we're doing is very, very specific to I mean, a lot of the things we do, even on the surface, is always tied to the geology, right? But that geology is though, for a lot of people is abstract. And how do you make that abstract more glaring? It's like me trying to describe an interpretive dance to you without you seeing it, right? And or maybe I try to do a sketch of it on a piece of paper and say, hey Matt, that thing that you moved that was like 540 feet that you drag on a piece of paper. It's impacting this, and this is what it impacts. And what we know is there are ways people do that already today, right? But we know the current way they do things on a 2D screen, there's still a lot of risks involved in that. And there have been so many near
Mm,
misses that equate to millions of dollars. And they would like to be able to mitigate that risk. And if this technology helps them do that, and they see a pathway to doing that, then that value is realized. There are three critical things I think that has enabled us to get to this stage. One is companies have been investing billions of dollars over decades. I mean, immersive technology is not just new, it's something that's been ongoing for the past 30 years. And this visualization device is so cheap now that you go off the shelf at a Best Buy or a Target and you pick one up. That's lowered the barrier of entry for people being able to look at their data immersively. The second thing is the integration. We've been building 3D models for a very long time, whether for the subsurface or whether it's for surface facilities. We've been building 3D models for a very, very long time, but we haven't had a way to truly view them in 3D and appreciate the scale of the risks of opportunities or challenges in what we've built, especially for the subsurface, because you typically require powerful workstations and sharing that at the end of the day, you always, there's a story of this geoscientist who was tasked with building a salt model. And the implication of that is, hey, you build this 3D model of a salt model, and we as a company are going to go bid on fields that are overlying or underlying the salt model. And it's this potentially $1 billion worth of an investment should we get it. And when she was done, it took her about 6 months. When she was done building the 3D model on this PC, she said when she had to share it, she had to take snapshots. So there were things that were lost in translation just because
mm,
you went from this concept to gather the data, data is expensive, spending millions acquiring data, spending maybe hundreds of thousands interpreting that data. And then you dump all that back down to a PDF and then you screen share it. Like you said, we're going to make billions of dollars on making, we have a whole frac schedule planned out on Outlook. We have a whole
mm.
development plan planned out on a PDF of a very, very complex. If things go wrong with how the well hits the salt or goes through the salt or away from the salt, there's so many windows of errors or errors of margin that you try to limit. I've been doing that, but still communicating that is still very, very challenging for a lot of people. It takes a lot of time. If we're even able to cut that communication down 10%, that's already very impactful. Now, what we're able to do is cut that communication down by more than half, by 50%.
Mhm.
And so think about the productivity gains on the geoscientist who's creating this and able to show the actual work without having to dumb down my
Yeah.
interpretive dance to a sketch.
Yeah,
And the operations that are going to be based off of that 3D interpretation.
that's really cool. I think about it you mentioned communication, but even that word has been overused to the point where people gloss over and, you
Yeah.
know, we can't fix our communication and stuff, but what it sounds like to me is it's a really strong tool for improving the shared understanding within an organization. Because like one of the things that pisses me off so much is like this Saga Wisdom conference that I went to a few weeks ago. So
Yeah.
it's reservoir engineers, a lot of very detailed, very high value impact work, but so much of that work gets wasted
Yeah.
because the outcome of that isn't shared. The understanding of how that works and how it should impact decisions isn't shared all the way up the line to decision makers. I mean, that's the point of having an organization is more people building on, this shared understanding for us to make decisions and work together on. And I don't know, that sounds really cool.
I was actually going to tack on that because I'm probably not doing enough good justice to this because in terms of organization, there's a whole lot of other layers to this as well. We build models, they're sitting in PCs somewhere, and the industry, especially geoscientists, has been culled by about 30%. And it's still forecasted that in the next maybe decade, we're also going to lose another 30%. And so there's a lot of knowledge that's going out, but there's a lot of what they called interpretive knowledge that they've also done that's just sitting on pieces not being utilized, right? Or sitting in databases and not being utilized. And this is another avenue to be able to utilize that information. 3D modeling is expensive, but we've
Mhm.
been building these 3D models for so long, and yet they're underutilized. One of the key things that we also did was not reinvent the wheel and have to build models. We simply just connect or integrate. I know, like you, with the software application you build, and even in your book, you highlight the effect of integration
Mhm.
to already a quality work that's already been done. And so we decided, okay, well, that's what we're going to do, right? So there are geoscience applications out there that we just say, okay, well, there's value in being able to communicate what you've done. There's quality work. You spent time, you spent money gathering that and building that. Now there's value in being able to share that beyond just this database that it sits in, beyond the species that it sits in. And so we tie into those systems in a seamless way and then distribute your work to your colleagues or whoever you want access to it, but in a very, very visual way. What I mean by that is the visual way is we're having here Teams call. It's on a 2D screen. Imagine us meeting in 3D, meaning I can give you a high five and you can
Yeah.
give me a high five, even though we're miles apart. Yet I'm able to share this cup with you. You can hold this cup, you can move it around. I can look at it from my perspective, you can look from your perspective. I'm able to now have a more engaging conversation as opposed
Mhm.
to yelling on the screen while you sitting miles away, like, hey, can you rotate it this way so I can see, okay, if we decide to attack it from this place, this is what I would be saying. So that's kind of like
Yeah.
I know it's kind of disjointed, but those are kind of the building blocks that we've built into Baselines. And it touches on not just geology, it touches on drilling as well. I know you mentioned there were a couple of comments about what people would like to see about AR in oil and gas. Imagine
Mhm.
looking at wells with the anti-collision planes. Another very interesting story. So there's a drilling supervisor who said, hey, every time in this field, we always get stuck at this particular point. We can't integrate the geology because all we have is just a PDF and it tells us this is the depth way I think you should be worried about. But when you move away from maybe you move 2 miles away, we're expecting to hit something at this depth, but we don't. But then we then hit
Mhm.
something at a depth we don't know. And it's costing us about $25,000 an hour. And we take out the bit and the bit is all chewed up. But even discount that, it said I would have to take pictures of the drill bits, take pictures of it and send it. Our phones are so powerful nowadays that they're all like embedded with LiDAR sensors that you can do a 3D scan
Mhm.
of the drill bit showing before and after and upload it. And we provide a very visual way for you to actually see the 3D model, also see that together with the actual geology. And you can be in the field, I can be in the office, and we're still talking about it.
That's the part that's crazy to me, and I know Bobby Nealon put a comment about, like, how far the technology has come and everything, but it seems just insanely accessible. So, like, our phones when I first got introduced to it, was several years ago. No, I don't know when it was, but I met Jim at,
Yeah.
I think we were eating wings one day, and we
Yeah.
were having lunch, and he pulls out his Oculus, from his backpack and hands it to me and says, "Put this on," and I put it on, and I'm playing with a 3D model of a piece of rock. Like, I don't know, it's just wild, and you look like a goon when you're sitting in Pluckers doing that, but, like, the ease of use and just being able to to get to that is really impressive. I'm sure you've got some interesting stories about people putting on a headset for the first time,
Yeah,
especially like some old school old patch guys
yeah.
responding to it differently. You got any good ones?
I don't wanna discount what you just described. Like, 1, you have this image model of a rock that you're playing with in the middle of pluckers, and 2, you also look like a goon doing it. Those are 2 critical things you touch on. 10 years ago, that wasn't possible, that
Yeah.
you'd be sitting in the middle of pluckers and have this $300 headset that you picked up from Best Buy and be able to look at that model, spin it around. That's I mean, that's impossible. People typically would fly in from all over the world to a particular visualization center to view what you just held in your hand in the middle of pluckers.
Yeah.
But the backdrop to that is you look like a goon in the middle of pluckers doing it. And there's the cultural aspect of it, and that's something that we can't fight, right? It's gonna be on a case by case basis with whoever is putting on the headsets. But what we do know is once people put on the headset, every preconception of what they had goes away because they very, very quickly realize the value of what they're just seeing. They very, very quickly realize the accessibility of it. They very, very quickly realize the novelty of it. And they very, very quickly realize that they're in the middle of pluckers doing what they couldn't do 10 years ago. It's like an iPhone moment. When the iPhone came out, whenever it was 2006 or 2008, no one dreamt that there would be geosteering the wells on an iPhone in the middle of pluckers. Yet here we are. Like I said, the adoption of these devices is going to vary depending on
Mhm.
whatever cultures you decide. But one thing I've noticed is it doesn't matter what old school. Once you put on the headset and you see your geology, you see your wells, you see your logs, you see reports relative, and you're like, oh wow, I didn't know this was possible. This was you either had to look at it as a PDF or you actually had to fly to some fancy place that is limited, logistically trying to get you in to view
Mhm.
it, and someone is always having to drive it. You can't look at it from your own perspective. I think it's truly, in a way, accelerating how we share very complex technical knowledge. And the accessibility of it allows us to tell that story to non-technical experts who we would need to be able to tell that story convincingly because now we're at a point where we're talking energy transition. In a way, I think of it as energy expansion because we're probably going to be doing
Mhm.
more stuff with the subsurface than we wanted to, whether we like it or
Yeah.
not, whether it's taking stuff out of it or sticking stuff in it, CO2
Yeah.
injection, geological storage. And, with the pervasiveness of the internet where a project can be stopped or started with a snap of a finger because of the information age we live in. I think this is a very valuable tool for allowing us to tell that story in a way that can highlight the benefits and also the risks of this huge multi-billion dollar subsurface project.
You made a connection for me that I hadn't fully made before was the rocks aren't getting any less important no matter what the future of energy looks like. Like, that we're
No,
gonna
then
need
yeah,
to be doing things underground and they're gonna be highly technical and require understanding, and I'm not gonna
yeah.
let you get away from it. I wanna hear some funny stories about some of these meetings and some of these demos and stuff. I'm sure you've got some good ones.
I mean, there's several. One thing that is very interesting, though, is the reception to a preface that we knew there was going to be challenging and how people put on headsets. So there's a reason why the way the applicate baselines was developed is meant to be cross-device. It's meant to be device agnostic, meaning you can use your phone, your tablets, to view the same data as you would with a headset. You can look at it from your PC, but for you to get that immersive experience, and then you have to put on a headset, be it a HoloLens or a
Mm,
Quest. Either way, I think we're able to address whatever reservations or objections people might have in regards to devices. And those devices, they keep getting better, right? Everyone
Mm,
is rumor about Apple coming up with their own device. Who knows what's going to look like? But what I found or observed is the pace of adoption specific to the oil and gas or anything subsurface seems to be higher in or less objectionable in Asia as opposed to the US, North America. Now, I say that loosely because this is just interactions that I've heard and observed. But that said, you still have old school people that when you tell them about this and you give a presentation, like, oh, I don't want to put that on, then they get curious. The way we look at it on the iPhone is like buying furniture from IKEA, right? You can
mm,
place an object, like, oh, that's my data. Okay. And then they look at it on the iPad. They can move it around. They see that if a colleague of theirs moves things around, they see it as well. And then they get a little adventures. They put on the HoloLens, right? The HoloLens, for people who don't know, the HoloLens, you still see through. It's a headset, but it's still see through. You can see around you. And they put that on and like, oh, wow, okay. So you can touch, you can move. I don't need to be in front of a PC to do that. And I can also walk around this. And then they put on the actual virtual reality, right? Which locks you in. But
mm.
the immersion is so much richer that every single time is like, oh, wow, I didn't think this is what you were talking about. I didn't know. I had no clue. And unfortunately, it doesn't do justice to what we're trying to do because almost 90% of the time when people then put on the headset, do they realize the value of what this
Yeah.
does?
They're seeing the interpretive dance after you sketched it for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, okay. I didn't know this is hit me, baby, one more time you're trying to do. All right.
I'm gonna need you to
Yeah.
write out a verbal description of "Hit Me, Baby, One More Time" dance. I think that
There's one who he said, "Hey, this is very impactful solution, but I look like a knucklehead in the middle of this open floor plan office, waving my hands around." So in that regard, I think I'm gonna be a pass, but it's still very, very cool technology. And I see the true value of it now, but it's still so new,
Yeah.
Matt, that we're working with companies right now, and we see the interest from companies. We're already looking at this technology but haven't necessarily thought or seen a use case specific to subsurface, right? People are already using this to go on field trips, right? They're using it to look at surface facilities and designing surface facilities. But to actually then see subsurface data, and that makes us truly unique, right? In a way. Makes me a little also anxious that maybe we're crazy because I haven't seen anyone else doing this at the scale that we're doing it, right? But when there's a lot of validation that we've gotten, and there's a lot of encouragement that we also get in saying, "Hey, you guys are on the right track. The problem you guys are solving is truly impactful." There was this chief geologist from a Scandinavian country who said, "There are things that I can't. It's just by definition of the subsurface, it's just difficult for me to explain to our drilling engineers. I can't show them on seismic because the resolution of seismic doesn't quite capture it. I have to use my geological interpretation and experience to create this target that they have to hit. Now I have it on my 3D modeling application, but I
Mm.
can't show it to them. And I know there have been so many near misses with our directional drilling that I don't want to risk it any longer. If I'm able to
Yeah.
just, hey, just put this on. This is where I'm trying to say, stay away from here, just 1 or 2 degrees of dogleg severity can impact you missing this. And if you miss that, that's 100 million down the drain.
I can tell how much you love this stuff. Like, you're
Yeah,
excited
it's
about it. So we have about 10 minutes left. I want
oh
us to
wow,
think
that's
about
that's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, it's flying by. We can talk for 8 hours, I'm sure. One of the things about, like, looking like a goon, I think that it is funny that, that comes back to ego and fear of, looking silly and stuff like that, and I think that's something that if people run into, they just need to go to therapy or something. Like like, I noticed it and, that's a self-confidence issue, right? Just,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I do think it is cultural and that kinda stuff is getting more and more common. I mean, Pokemon Go changed
Yeah.
the world with augmented reality and had a lot more people walking around doing stuff like that. But the other one, as you're on what seems like, a leading edge on this like technological front, especially with this industry. You mentioned being anxious about, hey, are we crazy? And,
Yeah,
are we too far out ahead of what people are ready for, and kind of trying to find that balance. I want to ask, how does that impact your, mindset kind of day to day? Because I could see that causing all kinds of stuff to happen in your head.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a very sensitive topic you brought up.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, someone actually said, "Okay, you guys are 5 years ahead of what we should be doing." But what's like? I forget the crossing the chasm curve. When you
Hmm.
look at early adopters and innovators and whatnot. That's typically how things are, right? You find the
Hmm.
early adopters. What makes me feel like we're not crazy is there are actually companies, oil and gas companies, that are actually looking at this. They actually do believe in this. They actually believe this is the future of work, and they're well funded to test and potentially deploy this future of work. So the oil and gas industry is a paradox in a sense, because in one sense we're pushing the envelope of technology innovation. In the other sense, we're also perceived as antediluvian, right?
Yeah.
And we just have to play and connect with the right people who also see the value that we see and ride that wave in a very sensible way, in a very, I guess, cost-effective way, to the point that, so that's all we're trying to do right now, manage all that anxiety that, "Are we crazy?" Yes, we are crazy, but we're finding other crazies inside the oil and gas industry that truly believe in this, and they're also pushing it. Now, the pace at which it happens or doesn't happen, that's what causes the anxiety, right?
Sure.
But we
Yeah,
do
it's one of
know
those
it's
things
gonna
where you
happen, right?
where
Yeah.
you're very confident that it's gonna happen. It's just a matter of when.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and if you can make enough to keep the lights on until then.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, if oil and gas companies are putting money toward this sort of thing, that means that it's very real, right? They wouldn't do it out of the goodness of their heart. Right?
It seems like there's more of them doing it in Europe and in Asia, though, than the US. But, we'll also get in there because I think the use cases are very different too. US tend to be more operational, real time. And we get all this feedback and it goes back into the application too.
Let's let's start to round things out. I think we went to some places that I didn't know that we would go on our conversation. That was a lot of fun, though. I wanna come back to, I mean, you're obviously, like, energized by the place that you're in right now, and that anxiety about, are you too far out in front or not? And, like, that kinda stuff is very real, and I feel like people deal with that kinda stuff a lot. But I wanna ask you, as somebody who's very engaged in what they're doing, I guess, what advice would you give to somebody that is, dealing with some of those sorts of anxieties? Maybe it manifests as imposter syndrome or all that sort of stuff. What have you found that helps you that you might share?
I I don't like giving advices, Matt, because it's just gonna be different for every. Okay, well, one day at a time. One day at a time. I also remember one thing my dad also says, this is why I don't give advices. Don't live your life according to someone else's time. It's just gonna be very different. So I'm going through my own anxieties the best way I think I can, right? Managing through it. And it's going to be different for someone else who's going through some kind of anxiety. It might be similar anxieties, but circumstances are always going to be different. The choices we make are always going to be different too. But I would love to connect with people who have this kind of anxiety then.
No matter
Share stories
no matter what, it's one day at a time. No,
one day
love
at a
it.
time.
If people wanna reach out to you or learn more about you and what you're doing, what's the best way?
LinkedIn, Jide Ayangade. That's a mouthful. And then Jide.Ayangade at Baselines. Baseline with a Z. Reason
Yeah,
why we call the baseline is we wanted everybody to be on the same baseline.
I like
And the
it.
Z component of it was just depth, right? So
I didn't know that. That ties all the way back to that shared understanding, right? That's
shared understanding.
that's really cool. Well, thank you, G-Day. This was fun. We're gonna do this again. I think we need to get out
Okay.
and play golf soon again
Yeah,
also.
we'll do that.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. This has been Achieve and Enjoy. We're on YouTube. You can follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, pod2.co/podcast to see show notes and transcript and all of that stuff. And I hope you enjoy your work this week.